Chapter 4 The Quimby's Quarrel. But Ramona, said Mrs. Quimby on Saturday, I've already told you that I boiled several eggs so I wouldn't have to boil an egg for you every morning. I put the boiled eggs on one shelf in the refrigerator and the raw eggs on another. In my hurry, I took an egg from the wrong shelf. I'm sorry. There is nothing more I can say. Ramona remained silent. She felt mean and unhappy because she wanted to forgive her. Mother, but something in that dark, deep down place inside her would not let her. Hearing her teacher call her a show off and a nuisance hurt so much she could not stop being angry at almost everyone. Mrs. Quimby sighed in a tired sort of way as she gathered up sheets and towels to feed into the washing machine in the basement. Ramona stared out the window and wished the misty rain, which fell softly and endlessly, would go away so she could go outdoors and roller skate away her bad feelings. Beezus was no help. She had spent the night at Mary Jane's house with several other girls, and they had stayed up late watching a horror movie on television and eating popcorn. Afterward, they stayed awake talking, too scared to go to sleep. That morning, Beezus had come home tired and grouchy and had fallen asleep almost immediately. Ramona wandered around the house looking for something to do, when she discovered her father sitting on the couch, pencil in hand, drawing pad on his knee, frowning at one bare foot. Daddy, what are you doing that for? Ramona wanted to know. That's what I keep asking myself, her father answered as he wiggled his toes. I have to draw a picture of my foot for my art class. I wish we got to do things like that in my school, said Ramona. She found pencil and paper, pulled off one shoe and sock, and climbed on the couch beside her father. Both steadied their feet and began to sketch. Ramona soon found that drawing a foot was more difficult than she had expected. Like her father, she stared, frowned, drew, erased, stared, frowned, and drew. For a little while, she forgot she was cross. She was enjoying herself. There, said Ramona at last. She had drawn a good, not an excellent foot. She looked at her father's paper and was disappointed in what she saw. It was the kind of picture a teacher would pin up off in the corner where no one but the artist would notice it. Her father's foot looked like a flipper. For the first time, Ramona began to doubt that her father was the best artist in the whole world. This thought made her feel sad, in addition to reminding her she was crossed at that world. Cross just means angry, upset, mad. Mr. Quimby studied Ramona's picture. That's not bad, he said. Not bad at all. My foot is easier to draw. Ramona felt as if she should apologize for drawing a better foot than her grown-up father. My foot is sort of neater, she explained. Your foot is kind of bony and your toes are hairy. That makes your foot harder to draw. Mr. Quimby crumbled his drawing and threw it into the fireplace. You make me sound like a Bigfoot, he said with a rueful laugh as he threw a cushion at Ramona. The day dragged on, but by dinner time, Ramona still had not been able to forgive her mother, who looked even more tired. Mr. Quimby had crumpled several more unsatisfactory drawings of his foot, and Beezus had emerged from her room, sleepy-eyed and half awake, when her mother called the family to supper. I wish we could have cornbread again, Ramona said, not because she particularly liked cornbread, but because she felt so cross she wanted to complain about something. Cornbread was a pretty shade of yellow, which would have looked cheerful on a misty day. She leaned forward to sniff the plate of food set before her. Ramona, even though her father did not speak the words, his voice said, we do not sniff our food in this house. Ramona sat up, broccoli and baked potato, both easy to eat. Pot roast. Ramona leaned closer to examine her meat. She could not find one bit of fat, and there was only a bit of gravy poured over her serving. Good. Ramona refused even the tiniest bit of fat. She did not like the slippery, squishy feeling in her mouth. Delicious, remarked Mr. Quimby, who did not feel he had to inspect his food before eating. Nice and tender, said Beezus, beginning to cheer up after her hard night. Ramona seized her fork, speared her meat to her plate, and began to saw with her knife. Ramona, try to hold your fork properly, said her father. Don't grip it with your fist. A fork is not a dagger. With a small sigh, Ramona changed her hold on her fork. Grown-ups never remembered the difficulty of cutting meat when one's elbows were so far below the tabletop. She succeeded in cutting a bite of meat the way her parents thought proper. It was unusually tender and not the least bit stringy like some pot roasts her mother had prepared. It tasted good, too. Yummy, said Ramona, forgetting her anger. The family ate in contented silence until Beezus pushed aside her gravy with the side of her fork. Gravy was fattening, and although Beezus was slender, even skinny, she was taking no chances. Mother, Beezus's voice was accusing, this meat has a rough surface. It does, answered Mrs. Quimby innocently. Ramona understood her mother was trying to hide something when she saw her parents exchange their secret sharing glance. She too scraped aside her gravy. Beezus was right. One edge of her meat was covered with tiny bumps. This meat is tongue. Beezus pushed aside with her fork. I don't like tongue. Tongue? Like Beezus, Ramona pushed her meat aside. Yuck, she said. Girls, stop being silly. Mrs. Quimby's voice was sharp. What do you mean you don't like tongue? Demanded Mr. Quimby. You were just eating it and enjoying it. But I didn't know it was tongue then, said Beezus. I hate tongue. Me too, said Ramona. All those yucky little bumps. Why can't we have plain meat? Mrs. Quimby was losing patience. Because tongue is cheaper. That's why. It's cheaper and it's nutritious. You know what I think, said Mr. Quimby. I think this whole thing is a lot of nonsense. You liked tongue when you didn't know it was tongue, so there is no reason why you can't eat it now. Yes, this whole thing is ridiculous, said Mrs. Quimby. Tongue is disgusting, said Beezus. Picky can have mine. Mine too, echoed Ramona, knowing she should eat what was set before her. But tongue. Her parents were asking too much. The meal continued in silence, the girls guilty, but defiant, the parents unrelenting. When Mr. Quimby finished his serving of tongue, he helped himself from Ramona's plate. Picky, purring like a rusty motor, walked into the dining room and rubbed against legs to remind the family that he should eat too. I wonder, said Mrs. Quimby, why we named the cat Picky. She and Mr. Quimby looked at one another and only partly suppressed their laughter. The girls exchanged sulky glances. Parents should not laugh at their children. Beezus silently cleared the table. Mrs. Quimby served applesauce and oatmeal cookies, while Mr. Quimby talked about his work at Santa's Little Helper in the frozen food warehouse. He told how snow fell inside the warehouse door when someone opened it and let in warm air. He told about a man who had to break icicles on his mustache when he left the warehouse. Snow indoors, icicles on a mustache. Ramona was full of questions that she would not let herself ask. Maybe working as Santa's little helper wasn't as much fun as she had thought. I'll tell you what, said Mr. Quimby to Mrs. Quimby, when the last cookie crumb had been eaten. You need a rest. Tomorrow the girls can get dinner, and you can take it easy. Good idea, said Mrs. Quimby. Sometimes I do get tired of cooking. But I'm supposed to go to Mary Jane's tomorrow, protested Beezus. Call her up and tell her you can't come. Mr. Quimby was both cheerful and heartless. That's not fair, said Beezus. Tell me why it isn't fair, said Mr. Quimby. When Beezus had no answer, Ramona understood their plight was serious. When their father behaved this way, he never changed his mind. But I don't know how to cook, Ramona protested, except Jell-O and French toast. Nonsense, said Mrs. Quimby. You are in the 3rd grade and you can read. Anyone who can read can cook. What'll we cook? Beezus had to accept the fact that she and Ramona had no way out. The same things I cook, said her mother. Whatever I have bought on a special that you can find in the refrigerator. And cornbread? Mr. Quimby, his face serious, but his eyes amused, looked at Ramona. I expect to be served cornbread. That evening, after the dishes had been put away, Picky was polishing gravy from his whiskers, and their parents were watching the evening news on television. Ramona marched into Beezus's room and shut the door. It's all your fault, she informed her sister, who was lying on the bed with a book. Why didn't you keep still? It's just as much your fault, said Beezus, you and your yucks. Both girls recognized nothing would be gained by arguing over blame. "But you like to cook," said Ramona. "And you like to make jello and French toast," said Beezus. The sisters looked at one another. What had gone wrong? Why didn't they want to prepare dinner? "I think they're mean," said Ramona. "They're punishing us," said Beezus. "That's what they're doing." The sisters scowled. They liked to cook. They did not like to be punished. They sat in silence, thinking cross thoughts about parents, especially their parents, their unfair, unkind parents who did not appreciate what nice daughters they had. Lots of parents would be happy to have nice daughters like Beezus and Ramona. "If I ever had a little girl, I won't ever make her eat tongue," said Ramona. "I'll give her good things to eat, things like stuffed olives and whipped cream." "Me too," agreed Beezus. "I wonder what there is for us to cook." "Let's go look in the refrigerator," suggested Ramona. Beezus objected. If they hear us open the refrigerator, Mom and Dad will think we're hungry and we'll get a lecture on not eating our dinner." "But I am hungry," said Ramona, although she understood the truth of Beezus's words. Oh well, she wouldn't actually starve to death before breakfast. She found herself thinking of French toast, golden with egg under a snowfall of powdered sugar. "Maybe," Beezus was thoughtful, "maybe if we're extra good, they'll forget about the whole thing." Ramona now felt sad as well as angry. Here she had worked so hard to do her part by getting along at the Kempses, and now her family was not pulling together. Something had gone wrong. Beezus was probably right. The only way to escape punishment was to try being extra good. "Okay," Ramona agreed, but her voice was gloomy. What a dismal thought, being extra good, but it was better than allowing their parents to punish them. Ramona went to her own room, where she curled up on her bed with a book. She wished something nice would happen to her mother and father, something that would help them forget the scene at the dinner table. She wished her father would succeed in drawing a perfect foot, the sort of foot his teacher would want to hang in the front of the room above the middle of the blackboard. Maybe a perfect foot would make him happy. And her mother? Maybe if Ramona could forgive her for not boiling the egg, she would be happy. In her heart, Ramona had forgiven her, and she was sorry she had been so cross with her mother. She longed to go tell her, but now she could not when she was being punished. Chapter 5. The Extra Good Sunday. Sunday morning, Ramona and Beezus were still resolved to be perfect until dinner time. They got up without being called, avoided arguing over who should read dear Abby's advice first in the paper, complimented their mother on her French toast, and went off through the drizzly rain to Sunday school, neat, combed, and bravely smiling. Later, they cleaned up their rooms without being told. At lunchtime, they ate without complaint the sandwiches they knew were made of ground-up tongue. A little added pickle relish did not fool them, but it did help. They dried the dishes and carefully avoided looking in the direction of the refrigerator lest their mother be reminded they were supposed to cook the evening meal. Mr. and Mrs. Quimby were good-humored. In fact, everyone was so unnaturally pleasant that Ramona almost wished someone would say something cross. By early afternoon, the question was still hanging in the air. Would the girls really have to prepare dinner? Why doesn't somebody say something? Ramona thought, weary of being so good, weary of longing to forgive her mother for the raw egg in her lunch. "Well, back to the old foot," said Mr. Quimby, as he once more settled himself on the couch, with drawing pad and pencil, and pulled off his shoe and sock. The rain finally stopped. Ramona watched for dry spots to appear on the sidewalk and thought of her roller skates in the closet. She looked into Beezus's room and found her sister reading. Ramona knew Beezus wanted to telephone Mary Jane, but had decided to wait until Mary Jane called to ask why she had not come over. Mary Jane did not call. The day dragged on. When dry spots in the concrete in front of the Quimby's house widened until moisture remained only in the cracks of the sidewalk, Ramona pulled her skates out of her closet. To her father, who was holding a drawing of his foot at arm's length to study it, she said, "Well, I guess I'll go out and skate." "Aren't you forgetting something?" he asked. "What?" asked Ramona, knowing very well what. "Dinner," he said. The question that had hung in the air all day was answered. The matter was settled. "We're stuck," Ramona told Beezus. "Now we can stop being so good." The sisters went into the kitchen, shut the door, and opened the refrigerator. "A package of chicken thighs," said Beezus with a groan, "and a package of frozen peas. And yogurt, 1 carton of plain, and 1 of banana. There must have been a special on yogurt." She closed the refrigerator and reached for a cookbook. "I could make place cards," said Ramona as Beezus frantically flipped pages. "We can't eat place cards," said Beezus. "Besides, cornbread is your job because you brought it up." Both girls spoke in whispers. There was no need to let their parents, their mean old parents, know what was going on in the kitchen. In her mother's recipe file, Ramona found the card for cornbread written in Mr. Quimby's grandmother's shaky handwriting, which Ramona found difficult to read. "I can't find a recipe for chicken thighs," said Ramona. "Just whole chicken. All I know is that mother bakes thighs in the flat glass dish with some kind of sauce. Mushroom soup mixed with something, and in some kind of little specks stirred in." Ramona remembered that much from watching her mother. Beezus opened the cupboard of canned goods. "But there isn't any mushroom soup," she said. "What are we going to do?" "Mix up something wet," suggested Ramona. "It would serve them right if it tasted awful." "Why don't we make something awful?" asked Beezus, "so they will know how we feel when we have to eat tongue." "What tastes really awful?" Ramona was eager to go along with the suggestion, united with her sister against their enemy, for the moment, their parents. Beezus, always practical, changed her mind. "It wouldn't work. We have to eat it too. And they're so mean, we'll probably have to do the dishes besides. Anyway, I guess you might say our honor is at stake, because they think we can't cook a good meal." Ramona was ready with another solution. "Throw everything in one dish." Beezus opened the package of chicken thighs and stared at them with distaste. "I can't stand touching raw meat," she said as she picked up a thigh between 2 forks. "Do we have to eat the skin?" asked Ramona. "All those yucky little bumps." Beezus found a pair of kitchen tongs. She tried holding down a thigh with a fork and pulling off the skin with the tongs. "Here, let me hold it," said Ramona, who was not squeamish about touching such things as worms or raw meat. She took a firm hold on the thigh while Beezus grasped the skin with the tongs. Both pulled, and the skin peeled away. They played tug-of-war with each thigh, leaving a sad-looking heap of skins on the counter and a layer of chicken thighs in the glass dish. "Can't you remember what little specks Mother uses?" asked Beezus. Ramona could not. The girls studied the spice shelf, unscrewed jar lids, and sniffed. "Nutmeg? No. Cloves? Terrible. Cinnamon? Chili powder? Well, yes, that must be it." Ramona remembered that the specks were red. Beezus stirred half a teaspoon of the dark red powder into the yogurt, which she poured over the chicken. She slid the dish into the oven, set at 350 degrees, the temperature for chicken recommended by the cookbook. In the living room came the sound of their parents' conversation, sometimes serious and sometimes highlighted by laughter. "While we're slaving out here," thought Ramona, as she climbed up on the counter to reach the box of cornmeal. After she climbed down, she discovered she had to climb up again for baking powder and soda. She finally knelt on the counter to save time and asked Beezus to bring her an egg. "It's a good thing Mother can't see you up there," remarked Beezus as she handed Ramona an egg. "How else am I supposed to reach things?" Ramona successfully broke the egg and tossed the shell onto the counter. "Now I need buttermilk." Beezus broke the news. There was no buttermilk in the refrigerator. "What'll I do?" whispered Ramona in a panic. "Here, use this." Beezus thrust the carton of yogurt at her sister. "Yogurt is sort of sour, so it might work." The kitchen door opened a crack. "What's going on in there?" inquired Mr. Quimby. Beezus hurled herself against the door. "You stay out," she ordered. "Dinner is going to be a surprise." For a moment, Ramona thought Beezus had been going to say a mess. She stirred egg and yogurt together, measured flour, spilling some on the floor, and then discovered she was short of cornmeal. More panic. My cooking teacher says that you should always check to see if you have all the ingredients before you start to cook, said Beezus. Oh, shut up! Ramona reached for a package of cream of wheat because its grains were about the same size as cornmeal. She scattered only a little on the top. Something was needed to sop up the sauce. Little red specks when the chicken was served. Rice! The spilled cream of wheat gritted underneath Beezus's feet as she measured rice and boiled water according to the directions on the package. When the rice was cooking, she slipped into the dining room to set the table and then remembered they had forgotten salad. Salad! Carrot sticks were quickest. Beezus began to scrape carrots into the sink. Yipe! Yelped Ramona from the counter. The rice! The lid of the pan was chittering. Beezus snatched a larger pan from the cupboard and transferred the rice. Do you girls need any help? Mrs. Quimby called from the living room. No, answered her daughters. Another calamity. The cornbread should bake at 400 degrees, a higher temperature than that needed for the chicken. What was Ramona to do? Stick it in the oven anyway. Beezus's face was flushed. In went the cornbread beside the chicken. Dessert! Whispered Beezus. All she could find was a can of boring pear halves. Back to the cookbook. Heat with a little butter and serve with jelly in each half, she read. Jelly. Half a jar of apricot jam would have to do. The pears and butter went into the saucepan. Never mind the syrup spilled on the floor. Beezus! Ramona held up the package of peas. Beezus groaned. Out came the partially cooked chicken while she stirred the thawing peas into the yogurt and shoved the dish back into the oven. The rice! They had forgotten the rice, which was only beginning to stick to the pan. Quick! Take it off the burner! How did their mother manage to get everything cooked at the right time? Put the carrot sticks on a dish. Pour the milk. Candles! Beezus whispered. Dinner might look better if we have candles. Ramona found 2 candle holders and 2 partly melted candles of uneven length. One of them had been used in a Halloween jack-o'-lantern. Beezus struck the match to light them, because although Ramona was brave about touching raw meat, she was skittish about lighting matches. Was the chicken done? The girls anxiously examined their main dish, bubbling and browned around the edges. Beezus stabbed a thigh with a fork, and when it did not bleed, she decided it must be done. A toothpick pricked into the cornbread came out clean. The cornbread was done. Flat, but done. Grit, 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 sounded under the girls' feet. It was amazing how a tiny bit of spilled cream of wheat could make the entire kitchen floor gritty. At last their dinner was served. The dining room light turned off, dinner announced, and the cooks, tense with anxiety that was hidden by candlelight, fell into their chairs as their parents seated themselves. Was this dinner going to be edible? Candles! Exclaimed Mrs. Quimby. What a festive meal! Let's taste it before we decide, said Mr. Quimby with his most wicked grin. The girls watched anxiously as their father took his first bite of chicken. He chewed thoughtfully and said with more surprise than necessary, Why, this is good! It really is, agreed Mrs. Quimby, and took a bit of cornbread. Very good, Ramona, she said. Mr. Quimby tasted the cornbread, just like grandmother used to make, he pronounced. The girls exchanged suppressed smiles. They could not taste the banana yogurt, and by candlelight no one could tell that the cornbread was a little pale. The chicken, Ramona decided, was not as good as her parents thought, or pretended to think, but she could eat it without gagging. Everyone relaxed, and Mrs. Quimby said chili powder was more interesting than paprika and asked which recipe they had used for the chicken. Ramona answered, Our own, as she exchanged another look with Beezus. Paprika! Those little specks in the sauce should have been paprika. We wanted to be creative, said Beezus. Conversation was more comfortable than it had been the previous evening. Mr. Quimby said he was finally satisfied with his drawing, which looked like a real foot. Beezus said her cooking class was studying the food groups everyone should eat every day. Ramona said there was this boy at school who called her Egghead. Mr. Quimby explained that egghead was slang for a very smart person. Ramona began to feel better about yard ape. The meal was a success. If the chicken did not taste as good as the girls had hoped, and the cornbread did not rise like their mother's, both were edible. Beezus and Ramona were silently grateful to their parents for enjoying, or pretending to enjoy, their cooking. The whole family cheered up. When they had finished their pears with apricot jam, Ramona gave her mother a shy smile. Mrs. Quimby smiled back and patted Ramona's hand. Ramona felt much lighter. Without using words, she had forgiven her mother for the unfortunate egg, and her mother had understood. Ramona could be happy again. "You cooks have worked so hard," said Mr. Quimby, "that I'm going to wash the dishes. I'll even finish clearing the table." "I'll help," volunteered Mrs. Quimby. The girls exchanged another secret smile as they excused themselves and skipped off to their rooms before their parents discovered the pile of chicken skins and the broken eggshell on the counter, the carrot scrapings in the sink, and the cream of wheat, flour, and pear syrup on the floor.